All right, my article this week was from the Wall Street Journal. I used to have a teacher that would call it the Wall Street Urinal. But
Wall Street Urinal?
The Wall Street Urinal.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I guess he didn't like the paper for whatever reason. Anyway, Wall Street Journal. And it said the title of the article, I think we'll get into this, but the title of the article is Why You Don't Need to Be an Accountant to Be a CFO, a Chief Financial Officer of a Company.
Ooh, boo.
I know. I mean, we're pretty biased here on this, on this one, but let's go through the exercise anyway. So basically, a report had come out, and since 2014, the amount or the percentage of the top 100 companies in the U.S. that have a CFO that has CPA credentials has dropped from 45% it was in 2014 down to 36% last year, which I found surprisingly low.
Yeah.
I would think that I would assume it probably would have hovered somewhere like in the 50-55% range, I would think. But anyway, but the article goes on to talk about the reason for this drop is that more companies are looking for CFOs that have experience in raising capital and talking with banks for debt or raising equity investments or stock sales. So that's really the wheelhouse of experience they're looking for. And then that the accounting knowledge is becoming less desirable in a CFO. But the thing to remember, and the thing that the title I think is misleading, is a lot of these companies that have CFOs that are focused or don't have a CPA background are companies that have like a controller or large accounting department that have very skilled people with CPAs and vast accounting knowledge to be able to implement GAAP correctly and complex transactions and analyze that kind of stuff and be compliant with like SEC filings and etc. So I just wanted your guys' take basically on the fact, on your guys' opinion. I'm sure I know it, but your guys' kind of opinion on this trend, and then kind of talk, and then we can kind of get into discussion about how I think the title's misleading, how I think the ripple effect is if some young entrepreneur reads this.
You're looking at me. Yeah.
I think we got fired up. We were talking about this off air.
Yeah.
So
no, I could get real fired up about this topic. So I'm trying to
Please do.
I'm trying to be measured in my thought process here because it's nothing new that at least from my perspective, and I'm not the one who invented this way of describing it, but typically you would see kind of two different possible CFO tracks. Either you have somebody who comes through the accounting ranks, or you have somebody who comes through, for lack of a better way of describing it, the investment banking ranks. Right. And that's clearly the case. Like in big cities, you have people that literally come out of investment banks and then end up being CFOs in companies where financing and M&A, you mentioned the need for that kind of CFO who maybe has a skill set that's different than accounting. Could be that what they're good at is raising money, or it could be that what they're good at or that they have a lot of leadership experience in is the investor relations side, or it could be that they have a lot of experience in structuring mergers and acquisitions, which may be important for some companies. That's a lot of their strategy is to go around and acquire a lot of different companies. And so I think that, and I've always thought this to be the case, that it depends on the type of company. There's not a one size fits all solution there. Some companies, what they need is they need more of that accounting background. The accounting background tends to be, and then when you talk about the accounting background, even that can be kind of split up into two camps. You've got your kind of reporting and compliance background, which are like your hardcore CPAs. And then you have your like operational accounting background, which are more people who kind of developed their accounting chops inside of companies and really have a good, strong understanding of what you kind of need to know and how you get things done from an operational standpoint in accounting departments. And hopefully you've got some of both of those. And so those are both of those. I mean, whether it's operational accounting or that regulatory compliance oriented accounting, those are not functions that your bankers who go into the CFO world have. And so then I think to your point as well is that if you have a company that has a strong need for the banking type of CFO, then it's obviously incumbent on the company to also have covered their bases on the operational and regulatory accounting side as well. And, the study or the article, once you get into it past the clickbait, they're talking about the largest 1,000 public companies. So yeah, in those kind of companies, like you said, they would have accounting departments. They often have chief accounting officers. It's not uncommon that they have accounting officers in the company that are actual officers of the company, like VP level people. So they've got very highly qualified, highly experienced accountants, as well as their banker CFO, right? It's not a one or the other kind of deal, right? And so I think that's an important context, because then when you bring it down to the small business community that we serve, and I think you alluded to this, that's kind of the danger in this kind of message, is that when in the small business community, when you can only afford one CFO, you can't afford to have, 5 different kinds of accountants and finance people in your company. You're going to choose 1 or 2 people in your finance department in a smaller company. Is it appropriate for, when you only have room for 1 or 2 kind of high level finance people, for those people to be bankers or the so-called strategic CFOs? And I think I would argue probably not. Probably if you're operating at that level, the first base you have to cover is having good accounting and reporting and operational accounting.
I'll even finish that question even more certainly. I would say you definitely cannot go without somebody that knows that kind of accounting if you want to be successful.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, and we've seen it with, in our own business, if the accounting's not taken care of, you can't take the next step towards getting funded. So even if you have a CFO that's like gung-ho or knows how to get funding, somebody's eventually going to look at a set of financial statements of some kind. I mean, you're going to have to cobble something together.
Yeah. And really, in the reality is, in the small business world, the person who knows how to help you get funding is not a CFO, they're a broker. Mm-hmm. And so, if you have a broker or a consultant who is helping you with raising money, then that's the appropriate path. But there's not a reason why that person should be running the finances in your company.
Right.
Well, and a lot of these CFOs who aren't CPAs are likely leveraging CPAs and getting the advice that they need for the issues that they maybe don't feel confident handling, and then implementing it in a way that it is repeatable in that company. And so at the end of the day, it's still, the same information that would come directly from a CPA in control.
I mean, that's what you would hope. I think what kind of maybe caught your attention about it, and what kind of maybe raises our ire a bit about a topic like this, is the cynicism that we have of the idea that some of this may come from just a lack of respect for the role of accounting and compliance in a business.
Yeah, I think totally. I think, one of the things I wish the for-profit world would, embrace, like the nonprofit world is like that compliance portion, and that like oversight, and the real commitment to having like a good control structure, and having like, people in place that know what they're doing to report. They do it because they have to keep their grants. And and it does cost money, and it's time consuming, and it's not, but if for-profit, a lot of those smaller businesses, if they would take like 1/4, 1/8 of what they do and implement it into a for-profit business, they'd be far better off. They'd have far better accounting records. They'd be able to, be more on time with reports and getting their tax returns done. And, and having somebody in place that's like knowledgeable and knows what they're doing from a debits and credits, compliance, tax compliance, law compliance, whatever it may be, in place that knows that stuff, you're far better off than if you're just running by the seat of your pants with somebody that knows how to get funding.
Yeah, you need some form of governance. Ultimately.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the article overemphasized the technical merits of somebody who knows how to get funding versus the leadership component, because I think where part of this reaches out, like if you ask the question, in a larger organization, does the CFO need to have an accounting background? I would admittedly say not necessarily. I mean, among the skills that are most important for the CFO of a larger organization, I would say business leadership is probably more at the top of the list than that person's specific accounting skills. But that goes back to the point that the context of that scenario is that presumably in that scenario, we are talking about a company that has an accounting department. Right. They've got a controller, they've got accounting officer, they have really well qualified accountants. They probably have a planning group made up of a bunch of MBAs, and they need a strong business leader who can kind of bring that all together and lead that group of people. And that's really the most important skill. And I thought it was interesting. They didn't really get into that part. They framed it in the article as raising money versus accounting. And to me, I think it actually is more, what do you need? Are you running a big group that requires more business leadership, or do you need more technical skill? Because if you frame it as one technical skill against the other, I think you get exactly in the argument that you're kind of posting, which is, well, is there any company that can choose the technical skill of just raising money in lieu of the technical skill of getting your accounting done? And of course, that's a ridiculous proposition. The accounting still has to get done, and you can't raise money without the accounting. So you can't choose one of those technical skills over the other. And the article almost sets up that argument. Yeah. But again, when they're talking about the top 1,000 public companies, I would propose it's actually not, in my view, it's not a either or on the technical skills front, because the truth is the CFO of that organization doesn't actually have the technical skills in either of those areas. The actual most important thing for that CFO to have is the general business leadership skills.
Well, yeah, and I think quarterbacking the team, right? Just to use a sport analogy, like quarterbacking the team, and I guarantee you the 35% of CPAs on there probably aren't using their credentials or like their vast knowledge of accounting as much as if they were in a different role. At that point in your career, when you're CFO or something like that, you're very much quarterbacking. You're not in the trenches like doing financial analysis. I mean, you might be, but I would probably bet not. Yeah. You're probably like having somebody else report that to you, and you're reviewing those reports because your time is spent better somewhere else. Yeah. Like plate spinning, you got 100 plates in the air. So I think it's naive to think that even the CPAs on the group, like they're in there, crunching the numbers on a 10Q. No, somebody else is doing that for them. They're the ones quarterbacking that effort. They're the ones keeping that project on track. If it's raising funds, even if you are a CPA, it's keeping that project on track. You're not working in a vacuum. You're not the magic performer on stage that gets everything done. Like, here's our funding. There's a whole team behind all that stuff when you're working in that type of company. And I think that's the thing that the article it barely touches on. It talks about those CFOs having contact with people that have that accounting knowledge and sharing that and learning enough to know what they're talking about. But I don't think it gets into the personnel management that is at that level of CFO.
Yeah, and I mean, as you talk about that kind of leads me towards perhaps another interesting question on this, which is, okay, if we're right that really, if we're talking about the big companies in the country, the big companies in the world, and it's really the business leadership skill that is the most important, which isn't about doing any particular technical skill, then I guess the next question would be, well, which path kind of prepares you for that sort of business leadership better? Does being a CPA, having worked up the accounting ranks in some way versus worked your way up the investment banking ranks, which of those prepares you for that kind of high level leadership better? And I think there could be great arguments on either side. And I can see the arguments, in terms of the nature of investment banking being relationship driven, and often it starts out the gate being more high level than crunching numbers down at the accounting level. I can see arguments for, well, investment bankers maybe are prepared better for that kind of high level leadership than accountants are, unless accountants have kind of other experience or skills that they're kind of bringing into that. But I don't know. I think I'd love to hear anybody kind of make other arguments either way, because I think that might be the real interesting conversation is which path better prepares you for the leadership issue.
Well, and I think when you're talking about what type of accountant, and I'll use you as an example, Charlie, if you talk about somebody like that has institutional knowledge on how something works, you know what I mean? I think Charlie's experience of being like at a company and working with those same personalities for so long, like I imagine your job now, even though it is a lot of debits and credits there, it's probably much different than like, you're more of a like, you're managing relationships.
Totally.
You know what I mean? As opposed, and so, but then I look at like our life in a public accounting firm. Yeah, you're managing personalities to a certain extent. You got to get along with people, especially if you're an auditor. You got to be able to sit in a room with them for 8 hours at a click and not piss them off. But and you're managing people underneath you. So but I think you're more managing a workload. I guess.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. When you talk about it at that level among accountants, there's definitely a different skill set to working on an executive team that's cross-functional versus working on an accounting team made up of nothing but other accountants.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think, that's typically what, if you spend your entire career in public accounting, then it takes a little bit longer to get that working cross-functionally skill set. I think when you look at like the partners of large accounting firms, they have gotten that skill set. It took them their careers until they got partners to really develop that kind of skill set, because the nature of the work, as you described, doesn't lead to it as much or as quickly, because early on in your careers you're working more with accountants. And I think if you are working in the accounting department in a company, you get that kind of exposure to working cross-functionally much earlier in your career. And so, those are trade-offs in careers, but I think the thing that I've always enjoyed observing is that, and I was alluding to a second ago about partners in large public accounting firms, is that what I've seen mostly in my experience is that all roads in terms of the highest levels of performance in any one of these disciplines tend to end up in the same place. Like if you look at the highest performers in a public accounting firm and the highest in the executives in big companies and the highest performers at banking organizations and so on, they all start to share common characteristics. They all kind of get there in different ways, right. but by the time they get to those highest levels within their organizations, they've had pretty broad exposures to different things that at different times in their careers that have led them to almost kind of the same spots a lot of the time. It's the reason we see such differentiation, in my opinion, the reason we see such differentiation among people in their careers is because people jump off earlier on, right? Most people don't stay in public accounting until they're a partner of a large firm.
Right.
Most people don't stay in banking until they're a senior executive in banking, and most people don't necessarily work their way up to the highest executive levels within their companies. And so if you're jumping out midstream from any of those places, then you only have the part of the skill set that you were able to develop within that path up until that time, which the paths I think are developing skill sets at different kinds of skills at different rates. And so I think that's what leads to the diversity that we see, is because there's only a small group that actually gets to the top of their particular niche, right?
Right.
Yeah. I think that's really true nowadays, as people are jumping around jobs maybe more today than they were in the past. And I think that's also especially true in smaller companies, because I know the article's focused on Fortune 500 or top 1,000 companies. But I think as you get into the smaller companies, you find that holds true more, that people are jumping around, or that there's not somebody staying there the entire time working their way up the ranks to get that level of experience.
Yeah, and I think that's great to bring this conversation back to kind of the smaller business scenario. And, we use this term on the podcast sometimes, small business. I mean, when we talk small businesses, we're still talking businesses that could be, 20 million in revenue. So
even 50.
Yeah. We're not
don't
talking.
Get offended.
Yeah, we're not talking business. We're not talking. I use the term sometimes micro businesses, because I think you have a lot of micro businesses out there with less than $1 million in sales, or they're basically what we'd call self-employment schemes. They're just people who otherwise would be employees, but they set themselves up as their own business. And it's structurally, they look like a business, but they're not really in that sense. And so I think, a lot of times people think that's what I mean when I talk about small businesses. They think, oh, you work with, that self-employed person down the street who makes a good living for themselves. And it's like, no, that's not what we're talking about. Most of the small businesses that we're actually talking about are making millions in revenue. They're not large businesses making hundreds of millions in revenue.
I think probably the term that we usually use is solopreneurs.
Yeah.
When we're
is that better
talking
than
about
self-employment scheme?
Who's
Yeah, I don't know. I guess, who knows, right?
who's we that uses that term?
Solopreneur. I like that.
Solopreneur?
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought we could start using it.
Okay.
Jerk.
Okay. Yeah, so that's what I think about solopreneurs too.
You're like solopreneur this.
Okay.
Yeah, no. But I think, like when we say small business, I always think of a small, like at least when I say small business, I think of a business that has, like 2, 3, 5, 10, more than one employee.
Right.
I think, you know.
I mean, can you imagine having a $15 million business and then some guy on a podcast calls you small? Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
Just imagine that.
You're upset by that. Yeah. Well,
But their
except
scale,
you want to be small when it qualifies you for certain incentives and
It all depends who's asking.
Right, exactly.
Or imagine like the solo guy that's listening to this that's like a house painter. He's like,
Yes.
I made $500,000 last year. That was a good business. And this guy's calling me micro.
Yeah. Look, hey, I'm not talking about what makes a good living.
No, I know.
Yeah. You can have a solopreneur who makes way more money than I've ever made,
Sure.
So there's that's not the question, but I think it's exactly what you get at when I think about a business. I mean, I'm way off on a tangent here, but I just want to throw this out here for all of perpetuity and discussion is that when I think about a business, you're talking about something that deploys capital and people, right? You deploy resources. It's not, and when I say a self-employment scheme, there's a lot of things in this country where for tax purposes, we make ourselves look like businesses, but we essentially are like employees. We're like beholden to like one big client. We may as well be their employee, but we set ourselves, that's a very common situation. And so I think, understanding the economics of that is different than like a business that deploys capital and employs people is a different proposition altogether. So anyway, just laying that out there, what we mean by small business. But if we're talking, in the small business world, bringing it back to this whole thing about, what kind of qualification, this idea that your CFO doesn't need to be an accountant. I think that that like we've talked here at ad nauseum, I think that's a foreseeable and understandable result of really big businesses. But it's, in a small business, I don't see how that really works. And in the times when I've seen businesses that have tried that, either on purpose because they got ahead of themselves. We've seen this a lot. We work in the cannabis community, right? We see a lot of these cannabis companies that are just so gung-ho on raising money and doing mergers and acquisitions and playing big shot, essentially. And so this is a direction that they may go where they basically don't have solid accounting, but they bring in a strategic CFO when they're too small to really need a strategic CFO in that. They really need solid accounting, and they need to make sure they maintain solid accounting, both operationally to understand their business and from a reporting standpoint. And so, I think that's kind of where you start. Now, that's not to say that a strategic CFO or somebody from banking, they may have the accounting skills. Like, let's not discount the fact that they just may have it for some reason, right? That's possible. So I think that, just like it's possible that somebody from the accounting ranks may have developed enough experience working with banks and financing folks that they know how to help that company with raising money or presenting their information in a way that is helpful to the process of raising money. So I think anything that puts people in boxes is questionable without context. You have to have context.
Yeah, there's definitely no mutual exclusivity in these skill sets that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Well, and especially at a high level like that, like we talked about, And I think to your point, a lot of those cannabis clients or like a lot of those cannabis companies that leapfrog the most important things to get to like the end kind of thing, they do themselves a disservice. And we often see them they don't make that they don't make it all the way because they tried to take a shortcut on the accounting side and just went straight to raising capital.
Right.
And I think that's the real danger that I think that I saw when I was reading this article was I I hope that these, small businesses or, like these kind of, small business people don't take this to heart and think that they need to change their thinking about what's being done at a very basic level in their company. Because let's be honest, like the accounting shouldn't be that difficult at some of these small businesses. Now, there may be technical issues that you have to work through, but none of it's rocket science, but you need somebody there that knows what they're doing, in the beginning to lay a good foundation for you to be able to have somebody in and come and raise money. I think that's, it's a foundational piece of your business.
Definitely.
Can't just be left for some, I hate to use the trope, but like a used car salesman looking for funding, I think it's always dangerous if you're substituting that for like real knowledge of what's going on.
Right. Yeah. And I think, on kind of a different tangent in the, how complex is the accounting of a small business? I think what's interesting about that is that as you see more startups and small businesses that get into innovative and disruptive type scenarios, I find, and I'm always surprised about the complexity of accounting that is disproportionate to their size, right? And I think especially if it's something that's in a newer industry, something that's disruptive, something that is truly innovative, really having a good understanding, being able to really understand and define the economics of your business model, and then account for it properly in a way that helps your leadership team understand that business model, right? So early on, having good accounting in that scenario is about being able to describe what's happening in the business to the rest of the leadership team so they can make good decisions. And the models that you're using to describe that company may necessarily require some pretty complex and creative thinking if you're working in a very disruptive, innovative type situation. So, I wouldn't discount that. And I would say all the more reason why you need really highly qualified people with really good accounting chops to be working in those scenarios, because your strategic folks may help kind of define some of the economics, but they generally don't have the experience of the operational experience of describing that to leadership teams that are trying to run the business. That kind of operational experience comes from accountants who've been working arm in arm with leadership inside of companies.
Yeah, or just the diligence to implement it. Like maybe they see that, but they don't view that as important in their role because they're so, busy in the strategic mindset that they're not thinking about the day-to-day of how does that actually play out in my organization, and are people actually doing what we are trying to do here?
Yeah. I find it rare in a small business environment that there truly is a role for a pure strategist. Usually it's what you really want is you want people who can cover, you want a team of people who can all cover important tactical areas of the business and then also can think strategically, so that you get the benefit of that strategic thinking. But it's not like somebody sitting around in an armchair all day doing nothing but thinking about strategy, right? It's, and I think, obviously we can say that for that CFO role in the small businesses, you want somebody who has the capability of thinking strategically, but they have the experience to cover your bases tactically as well. And that's the danger of really just going after the strategic CFO in a small business, is that they really don't have enough tactical experience to cover the bases of what you need.
Yeah. You want a Star Trek account, right?
We learned a new term this week from AJ, the Star Trek accountant. The Star Trek accountant. Yeah, that.
So here, Charlie hasn't heard this yet.
So I'm waiting on the edge of my seat.
Do you remember the Star Trek TV show you were watching?
Star Trek, yes.
Well, let's set this up. So the scenario where this would come up, is you're working on a team. And you've got a team member, an accountant, who is should be really busy, and you think probably should have a lot of stuff to do, but seemingly always seems to have time to get in the middle of your business and tell you how you should do what you're doing better.
That's how this came up.
So take it away.
Okay.
So take it away, AJ.
So I called it the Star Trek accountant because the Star Trek movies and series and everything, for the most part, Earth was figured out. Like we had shit locked down. Nobody's going hungry. Nobody's dying. Whatever. In fact, we have it so locked down, we go out into space and try to find other problems to solve.
Yeah.
And so that's a Star Trek account. They got their shit so handled that they don't need to worry about it. They're going to start worrying about your stuff and like that stuff and the minutia detail of something else. So I guess it's a good problem to have, but Ty and I were discussing it earlier in the week and we thought it was kind of funny.
I can imagine that.
That's probably the more common scenario is like the accountants that you work with that just, any new thing that comes up, they just get all wrapped around a pole worrying about like the application of some new rule or some new thing happening in the business. They're just like a dog with a bone, man. They're just like all over it and they're not going to let it go until that issue's resolved. And you're like, we can keep discussing this issue for another 12 months before we really have to do anything about it. But they're like hell bent on dealing with it right now. And it's a common personality type that you find in accounting. It happens all the time.
I just had this client. I remember she was she was not a classically trained accountant, but she was so bright. I told her she should have got her CPA because she was a dance major, but she administered all these federal grants. So there's all these like strings attached and everything. And she was self-taught, like a self-taught accountant. But man, she'd run circles. I mean, if you ask her questions about like any of her regulations or anything like that, she would run circles around like CPAs. I'd see CPAs go, "Whoa," when she would talk. But I'd have the longest conversation. They probably did like 50 mil in revenue or something like that or something. But I would have the longest conversations with her about $2,000 worth of advertising money that they brought in that she wanted for sure. She thought that they should file it as UBIT, like, unrelated business income.
Sure.
And I'm like, the 2,000, nobody's ever, you got $2,000 worth of advertising income. And we want to like spend 2 hours talking about, UBIT and how we're going to have to file a 990T, like that. No, like, nobody's ever going to question it.
Yeah. There's no sensibility of materiality there.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Mm-mm. But she was convinced, and came to bear too. I mean, she had a folder full of like the UBIT like rules.
She was ready to play.
Yeah. How advertising was for sure UBIT.
She was taking the field. Get your pads on, AJ. It's time to go.
Yeah. She literally like threw the folder down and got a 3-point stance and said, "Let's rock, MFer." No. Nice. But yeah. So the Star Trek account, you can use that next time.
I will.
Feel free.
Yeah, I'm sold.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I knew where you were going right away when you said that, but I've been thinking afterwards. I'm like, if we use that, how many people actually know Star Trek that well that would get that reference right away?
With that explanation, I think it sinks in.
And I have to admit, Comic Girl 19, I doubt she'll ever see this, but she was the one that explained Star Trek like that. And I had watched all the series.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, oh, it makes so much sense. That's right. They never had to, the reason you never saw Earth because they weren't concerned about it.
Yeah, until the Borg came.
Yeah. And took everything over.
Yeah, then it was a problem. But yeah, prior to that, they were all cool.
Everything's great.
Yeah.
I like that.
All right. Well, so I think we're way far afield from the article. So should we call it done?
We're off in the stars.
Outro it or what?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for watching. Make sure you debit your Karma asset and smash that thumbs up, share it with your friends, and smash the subscribe button and the notification bell. Thanks for watching None of Our Business podcast. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks.
Thank you.